The same weekend I walked across the stage to receive my diploma, graduating summa cum laude after 4 years of late-night shifts at a gas station just to cover my expenses. My parents hosted a huge celebration with champagne, fairy lights, and a custom cake decorated with gold lettering, but none of it was meant for me. The entire event was actually my sister's engagement party. Meanwhile, my seat at the graduation ceremony stayed empty, a silent reminder that no one from my family had come to watch me reach the moment I had worked so hard for. Later that night, the only message I received from my mother said, "Sorry, honey. Kendra needed us more. You understand, right?" 7 years passed before anything changed. Then one day my mother saw photos of my penthouse online, and suddenly her tone toward me softened as if nothing had ever happened. What she didn't realize was that I had been quietly waiting all those years, not for revenge but for the truth to finally have enough space to be heard. When I arrived at the family dinner that followed, I brought a simple manila envelope with me, and what was inside would soon shift the entire conversation, though not in the way my mother expected. My name is Bryn, I'm 29 years old and I live in Raleigh, North Carolina. To understand how everything unfolded, you have to go back 7 years to the day an empty chair in the front row told me exactly where I stood in my own family. I grew up in a small town in Georgia where everyone recognized your last name before they even knew you personally. The Myers family lived in a modest yellow house on Pannon Lane with 4 bedrooms, 1 bathroom and a refrigerator that seemed almost entirely dedicated to pictures of my older sister, Kendra. She was 3 years ahead of me and fit perfectly into the image my mother loved to share. Prom queen, homecoming court, captain of the dance team, always smiling in every photo posted online with captions praising her achievements. Looking back, it sometimes felt like my mother believed she had only one daughter. I wasn't invisible exactly, I was simply the one who made things easier. I worked the overnight shift from 11 to 7 at the Shell station on Route 9 so I wouldn't have to ask for money for textbooks or school supplies. I managed to keep a perfect grade record through all 4 years of high school, and when I received my acceptance letter from NC State with a full academic scholarship, I ran into the kitchen waving it proudly. My mother glanced up briefly from her phone and said, "That's nice, honey. Could you tell Kendra dinner is ready?" That night I taped my honor roll certificate to the refrigerator beside Kendra's senior portrait, hoping maybe someone would notice it. By the next morning it had disappeared and I found it in the recycling bin under an empty cereal box. When I asked my mother about it, she simply said the fridge looked cluttered and there wasn't space for everything. There were 11 photos of Kendra on that refrigerator. I counted them one by one. My father, Gerald, worked as a mechanic at the local auto shop. He was a quiet man with skilled hands and a calm nature. I believe he loved both of us, but he valued keeping the household peaceful even more. And in our home, peace usually meant agreeing with whatever my mother decided. At the time I didn't fully understand it, but that refrigerator covered in one daughter's photos and missing the other's achievements quietly reflected the pattern that would follow us for years. Then came May 2019 and the NC State commencement ceremony. The arena held thousands of people, and the energy was loud and joyful as families cheered, waved signs and celebrated their graduates. Yet in the middle of that excitement, the 2 seats reserved for my parents in row 7 remained empty. I had mailed the invitation months earlier and reminded my mother several times. The last time we spoke on video, she had squeezed my hand through the screen and promised they would be there. Still, when I crossed the stage in my blue gown with a gold cord, smiling as the dean congratulated me for my hard work, those 2 seats stayed empty. After the ceremony, graduates hugged their families on the lawn while parents lifted diplomas proudly for photos. I stood alone near the exit holding mine carefully in both hands, unsure where to go next. My phone buzzed with a single message from my mother saying she was sorry they missed it because Kendra's engagement celebration had been scheduled the same day and she needed their help preparing. She ended the message by asking if I understood, and I read those words twice, slowly realizing that sometimes silence and absence can say more than any explanation ever could. I walked out to the parking lot, sat inside my old Civic and gently placed my diploma in the trunk beside my laundry bag. I didn't cry. Crying would have meant I was shocked, and honestly I wasn't. I stayed there for nearly 20 minutes while the parking lot slowly emptied and the noise from the arena faded away. I kept staring through the windshield, unsure where to go or what to do next. What I didn't know then, something I would only learn 7 years later, was that my father had actually been inside that arena. He had been sitting quietly in the back row about 10 minutes before my name was called, but I wouldn't discover that until much later. A week after the ceremony, I drove the 4 hours back to Cooperton and stepped through the front door of the house. The living room still looked like it was set up for a celebration. Silver balloons were drooping in the corner, and on the counter sat a half-eaten sheet cake with pink icing that read, "Kendra and Travis Forever." My graduation had been 7 days earlier, yet the confetti from my sister's engagement party was still scattered across the floor. I asked Mom why she hadn't come to my graduation, but Donna was sitting at the kitchen table folding napkins and barely glanced up. She calmly told me not to make everything about myself because Kendra's engagement was a once-in-a-lifetime event. I reminded her that graduating was also an important moment for me, but she just gave me a polite look and said I would have many more achievements in the future, while Kendra needed the attention that day. I stood there gripping my car keys so tightly that the metal pressed into my palm. Just then Kendra walked in from the hallway, holding up her hand to admire the ring again, hugged Donna, grabbed a piece of cake and sat down without asking a single thing about my graduation. She didn't ask how the ceremony went, what I wore, or if anyone congratulated me. Instead, she talked excitedly for 20 minutes about wedding decorations and table arrangements. Gerald sat quietly on the sofa the entire time with SportsCenter playing silently on the television, never saying a word. Eventually I picked up my bag and said I should head back. No one asked when I would visit again or even how the drive would be. As I reached the door, I noticed Gerald briefly look up from the TV, and for a second there was something in his eyes. Maybe regret, maybe something he wanted to say but couldn't. He quickly looked away before I could read his expression clearly. I had driven 4 hours hoping for a simple answer, but by that moment I already understood everything without anyone explaining it. That summer I moved to Raleigh and decided not to look back. I rented a tiny studio apartment that barely fit a bed and a small table, and I started an entry-level job as a data analyst at a logistics company. Most nights I ate simple meals like rice and frozen vegetables and told myself it was a healthy lifestyle choice, even though it was really just about saving money. Life wasn't fancy, but it was my own life and my own effort. About a year after graduation, when I was 23, my phone rang at 9 o'clock on a Tuesday night. Donna sounded worried and tired as she explained that the mortgage payment had increased and Gerald's back pain was getting worse, making it hard for him to work full shifts. She said they might lose the house, and immediately my mind filled with memories of that yellow ranch house on Pan Lane, the porch where I learned to ride a bike and the garage where Gerald kept his tools. I asked how much they needed and she said $1,200 a month just until things improved. That amount was nearly half of what I earned, and I quickly calculated my budget twice before agreeing anyway. Soon after, I set up an automatic transfer so that every month on the 15th, $1,200 left my account like clockwork, almost like I was paying rent for a house I no longer lived in. Around 2 years ago, when I was 27, I met Marcus at a friend's housewarming party. He worked as a CPA and was the kind of person who carefully studied financial details the way others read stories. After looking at my monthly expenses, he told me gently that I was being too generous with my money. I laughed it off at the time because by then I had already been sending $1,200 every month for 6 years without once asking to see the actual mortgage statement. Looking back, that decision turned out to be a major mistake. 3 years ago, Donna called again on another Tuesday night and told me their car had stopped working. She said Gerald needed a vehicle to get to work and had found a used Chevy Equinox for $22,000. But her credit score was too low to qualify for the loan. She asked if I could co-sign so they could get approved. I hesitated because co-signing meant taking responsibility for the loan, but she assured me she would handle every payment and asked if I trusted her. Thinking about Gerald struggling to get to work and remembering the times he helped me when I was younger, I agreed and signed the papers the following week. For the first 2 years everything went smoothly and every payment was made on time, so eventually I stopped thinking about the loan at all. Then about 6 months ago, I received a notice from the bank saying the payment was 14 days late. I texted Donna right away, asking if everything was okay, and she replied that it was just a small delay and nothing to worry about. 2 months later another notice arrived saying the payment was 19 days overdue, which started affecting my credit. When I confronted her, she insisted she would handle it and said I was overreacting, but Marcus later explained something important to me over dinner. Every late payment leaves a mark on your credit report, and those marks can follow you for years if they keep happening. When Marcus explained how credit scores work, he mentioned that if my score dropped below a certain level, the bank could review my mortgage. That immediately caught my attention. My mortgage. The one tied to the penthouse I had purchased just 6 months earlier, the biggest financial step I had ever taken. Suddenly I realized that Donna had my name on a loan and was starting to treat it like a string she could pull whenever she wanted. One evening I sat at my kitchen counter with my laptop and did what I always do when something feels wrong. I calculated everything. Over 6 years, I had sent 72 monthly payments of $1,200 to help with my parents' mortgage. That added up to $86,400. On top of that was the car loan I had co-signed for, $22,000 under my name, with payments that were starting to arrive late. My credit score had already dropped 11 points in just 3 months. Marcus reviewed my mortgage paperwork and showed me a section that said if my credit fell below a certain level during the first 2 years, the lender could start a review process. It wouldn't mean losing the home immediately, but it could raise questions I didn't want hanging over me. That penthouse meant more to me than its $990,000 price or the city view from the 14th floor. I loved it because it was the first place I ever stepped into and truly felt proud, knowing I had earned it myself. No one helped sign for it, no one else had their name on the deed. It was the result of years of effort. Now it felt like that achievement was being placed at risk because my mother couldn't, or wouldn't, keep up with a simple car payment. Around that same time I noticed something else. Donna had stopped following me on Facebook months earlier, but she still followed my Instagram account, the one I barely used until I posted the photo of my new penthouse. I leaned back in my chair one night and said the truth out loud just to hear it clearly. For 6 years I had been acting like the family's personal bank machine. Marcus didn't argue or comment. He simply looked at me, and that silence was enough. I understood that if nothing changed, I could lose the home I had worked so hard for, damage my credit, and watch years of progress disappear. Still, money alone wasn't the moment that pushed me to take action. That moment came about 4 months before the family dinner. Donna began calling twice a week, always with the same tone and the same type of story. She would say that Kendra was having a difficult time and that Travis had lost his job, then slowly turn the conversation toward money. Prices were rising, things were tight, and family should help each other. That was the message each time. I reminded her that I was already sending $1,200 every month, but she always found a way to ask for more. When I suggested that Kendra should try solving some of her own problems, the line would go quiet before Donna answered with a disappointed voice, telling me not to be harsh because Kendra was my sister. I explained that I wasn't being harsh, I was simply asking a fair question. But then Donna would bring up Gerald's health and say he had struggled through the winter while I lived comfortably in my apartment. I recognized the pattern quickly. Whenever I questioned anything, the conversation followed the same script. Either she became emotional or she mentioned Gerald's pain to make me feel responsible. If I asked for details, she avoided them. If I asked how much was needed, she gave a number without explanation. Something else started to stand out. Gerald was never part of these calls. Not once. Whenever I asked to speak with him, Donna would say he was resting or busy in the garage. There was always some reason he couldn't come to the phone. One Tuesday I tried calling his cell phone directly, but it went straight to voicemail. I left a message and waited, yet he never returned the call. That was the moment a new question appeared in my mind. Was Gerald choosing to stay silent, or was that silence being arranged for him? I began to realize something I had never clearly described before. Donna controlled communication in our family. She decided who spoke to whom when conversations happened and what information was shared. Every discussion seemed to pass through her first. I could see the pattern forming, although the full truth was still unclear. Then tax season arrived. Marcus and I sat on the living room floor surrounded by paperwork, receipts, and my laptop showing my bank account. As he scrolled through the long list of transfers, he stopped and asked why I was still sending $1,200 every month to my parents. I told him it was to help with their mortgage. He looked surprised and reminded me that the house was in rural Georgia. Then he opened Zillow on his phone and asked for the address. I gave it to him and he typed it in before turning the screen toward me. The listing showed the yellow house on Pannon Lane with an estimated value of about $185,000. Built in 1996 and last sold in 1998. Marcus leaned forward and said quietly that a house like that, purchased in the late 1990s in a small town like Cooperton, Georgia, should have had most of its mortgage paid off by now. That simple observation made me pause and start thinking about the situation in a completely different way. Marcus leaned back and asked a simple question. What do you think the original mortgage on that house was? I shrugged and guessed maybe around $120,000 on a 30-year loan. He nodded and explained that a payment like that would probably have been under $800 a month, especially back then, and after more than 20 years of payments it should have been much lower by now. He set his phone down on the coffee table and looked at me calmly. Bryn, you're sending more than their likely payment. I stared at the image of the small yellow house on the screen, the same porch where we used to sit in the evenings and the mailbox my father repainted every spring. Marcus spoke carefully, saying there was also a real possibility that the mortgage had already been paid off. I didn't respond right away. Something inside me shifted, not quite anger yet, but the beginning of it, like noticing a tiny crack in a wall you always believed was strong. Marcus told me he wasn't trying to influence my opinion, only showing what the numbers suggested. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept lying awake doing the math in my head. A $120,000 mortgage paid over 25 years should have been close to finished, even without extra payments. So where exactly had my money been going all this time? The next afternoon I called Donna while she would likely be fully awake and alert. I kept my voice calm and asked a direct question. What was the exact balance remaining on the house mortgage? There was silence for several seconds before she answered, asking why I suddenly wanted to know. I told her I simply wanted to understand where my monthly transfers were going. Her tone changed instantly, not louder but colder and more controlled. She said I sounded suspicious after everything she had done for the family and complained that she didn't like the way I was speaking. Then she paused and asked if Marcus had been influencing my thinking. I explained again that I was just asking for a clear number. Instead of answering, she shifted the conversation to other problems, saying my sister was struggling and my father's health was getting worse. And then she mentioned that she might not even be able to make the car payment that month. I held the phone tightly as I realized she still hadn't answered my question. She had moved the conversation somewhere else entirely. The mention of the car loan, the one I had co-signed, felt like a warning hanging in the air. A moment later she said Kendra was calling on the other line and ended the call. I sat quietly on the edge of my bed thinking through what had just happened. In less than 2 minutes she had avoided the mortgage question, turned the focus to family pressure, and hinted at the car loan tied to my credit. That was the moment I understood something important. This situation wasn't simply about helping family anymore. It had become a way to control me. A few months later, about 3 months before the dinner, Marcus walked into the kitchen on a Saturday morning holding his laptop and asked me to sit down. He had opened the public county records for Cooperton, Georgia. Property taxes, ownership documents, and loan history that anyone could view online. With my permission, he had searched for the Myers family home. When he turned the screen toward me, I saw the listing for the house on Pannon Lane. The record clearly showed the mortgage status as fully satisfied, with the payoff date listed as March 2019. There were no additional loans or claims attached to the property. I felt my stomach tighten as the timeline clicked together in my mind. I had started sending money in October 2019, 7 months after the mortgage had already been completely paid off. Marcus quietly printed the record and slid the paper across the table. I stared at it like someone reading test results they already fear are bad news. Over 6 years I had sent $86,400 for a mortgage that no longer existed. I didn't say a word. Instead, I put on my running shoes and went outside, running through downtown Raleigh for nearly 45 minutes. As I passed familiar streets and places I'd visited before, the truth settled in slowly. For years I had believed I was helping my family, but now it looked like the story I had trusted might have been very different from reality. That I kept running until my legs ached and my thoughts finally slowed down. When I returned home, Marcus was still sitting at the table exactly where I had left him, the laptop still open in front of him. He looked up calmly and said that whatever decision I made, he would support me. I grabbed a glass of water and drank it while standing by the counter trying to steady my breathing. I told him I already knew the money I had been sending wasn't going toward the house anymore, but I still didn't know where it had actually gone. The answer arrived from someone I never expected, through a phone call I almost ignored. My uncle Frank, my father's older brother, called that Thursday afternoon. Frank is a quiet man, a carpenter in his 60s with rough hands and a direct way of speaking. He usually keeps conversations short, but he has always stayed loosely in touch with me, birthday texts, a quick call during the holidays, small reminders that he was still around. So when I saw his name on my phone, I answered right away. He asked if we could talk privately for a moment. Then he explained that my mother had been telling relatives that I never called anymore and that I had distanced myself from the family. She had even told my aunt that I refused to help when my father had a health problem the year before. I was stunned because I had never even heard about that situation. Frank then told me something else. My mother had recently asked him for a large loan for my sister, claiming she was struggling financially. When he reminded her that I already sent money every month to help the family, she insisted that my support only covered the house payment. Frank responded by mentioning that he personally helped my father repaint the house the previous summer and that my father had told him the mortgage was already finished. According to Frank, my mother ended the conversation immediately after that. Hearing this made everything feel unsteady for a moment. It became clear that the story I had been told for years didn't match reality. Frank didn't know every detail, but he warned me gently to be careful the next time I went home. After that call, I spent the next 6 weeks quietly organizing everything. First, I dealt with the car loan by refinancing it into my name alone. My credit was still strong enough, so the bank approved it. That meant the vehicle stayed with my parents, but the loan was fully under my control. No one could use it to pressure me anymore. Next, I built a clear timeline. I printed 6 years of bank statements showing every transfer I had sent, along with the property record proving the mortgage had already been paid months before those payments even began. Side by side, the numbers told a very clear story. Marcus looked at the documents and said it read like a professional financial review, which was exactly what I wanted. Simple facts without emotion. I placed the papers neatly into a manila envelope and set it aside. Then something unexpected happened while I was cleaning out an old box from college. At the bottom, I found the graduation invitation I had mailed to my parents years earlier. Inside, I had written a note saving 2 seats for them in the front section. I held that card for a long time before placing it into the same envelope with the financial records. I wasn't planning a confrontation. I was simply collecting the truth and keeping it together in one place. A couple of weeks before the family dinner, I posted a simple photo on social media from my balcony overlooking the Raleigh skyline. The evening light was beautiful and I captioned the photo with just one word: home. Friends responded with normal comments and kind messages, but a few hours later my phone began lighting up non-stop with messages from relatives who suddenly wanted to know if that apartment in the photo really belonged to me. The sudden interest from people who had been quiet for years felt strange, and it made me realize that the next family gathering might bring questions no one had asked before. After that photo, messages started pouring in from relatives asking questions about my apartment and the view. Some wanted to know how much it cost or when I moved there. Then a private message arrived from my mother. I read it twice because the tone surprised me. She wrote, "Darling, we need to talk. Come home this weekend. We're waiting for you." My mother had not called me darling since I was a child, long before our relationship changed and long before my sister became the center of everything. One photo of my home and suddenly my mother remembered I existed. I showed the message to Marcus. He read it quietly, set the phone down and asked what I wanted to do. The truth was I had already made up my mind the moment I saw the property records proving the house had been paid off years ago. I told him I would go. He asked if I thought it was just a normal dinner and I told him I doubted it. It felt more like a setup for something bigger, but I was ready for that. I replied to my mother saying I would be there on Saturday. By that point, the envelope with all the documents was already in my bag. The car loan had been refinanced, and the automatic monthly transfers had been canceled a few days earlier. I wasn't going home because I was unsure. I was going because I was prepared. 2 days before the dinner, I called my cousin Natalie, Uncle Frank's daughter, who works at the county clerk's office. We had always stayed friendly even after I moved away. During our call she hesitated and then asked if something strange had happened between me and my parents. She explained that my mother had been telling relatives that I left the family and refused to stay in touch. According to her story, I even ignored calls when my father had health problems the year before. Hearing that made my stomach tighten because no one had ever told me my father was sick. I told Natalie the truth, that I had never received a call and didn't even know about the situation. After a quiet moment, she said she believed me and admitted that some family members had begun to question the story they had been told. When the call ended, I stood in my kitchen realizing something important. This was no longer just about money. My mother had also changed the story about who I was, turning me into the distant daughter who abandoned her family. That version of me had been repeated to everyone who would be at that dinner. Saturday finally arrived and Marcus and I left Raleigh early in the morning for the long drive south. The manila envelope sat quietly in my bag on the back seat the entire time. When we turned onto my parents' street, I immediately noticed something unusual. Cars were parked along both sides of the road and even onto nearby lawns. It looked more like a gathering than a small dinner. Marcus glanced at the crowded street and said it didn't feel like a simple family visit, and I agreed. We parked at the end of the block and walked toward the house. Through the front window I could see the living room packed with relatives, neighbors and people from church. There were easily 20 people inside. Before I even reached the porch, the front door opened and my mother hurried out with wide arms and tears already in her eyes, loudly announcing that I had arrived. She hugged me tightly while people inside applauded and welcomed me as if I had been gone for years. When I stepped into the house, I saw a long dining table pulled into the living room with dishes and drinks spread everywhere and a banner above the fireplace that read "Family First." My father stood quietly in the kitchen drying a glass without looking up, while my sister sat at the far end beside her fiancé, smiling in a way that felt forced. I took a seat at the table, my bag resting on my lap, feeling the envelope inside it and knowing that before the night ended, the truth I carried with me would finally come out.